When Eleanor Hawthorne's father discovers her lost virtue, he sentences her to work for Moses Carter, a freed slave, he believes, will teach her the harsh lessons of a ruined woman. But as the Nevada Territory dust settles around their unlikely partnership, Eleanor discovers that the man intended as her punishment might actually be the key to finding her true worth if she's brave enough to defy everything society expects of her. Will a woman cast out in shame find that love can bloom even in the harshest ground? A woman's desperate scream cuts through the Nevada Territory morning like a knife through silk. Eleanor Hawthorne bolts upright in her narrow bed, cold sweat beating on her forehead as the nightmare fades. But the real terror waits downstairs, where her father's voice booms like thunder rolling across the desert mountains. "Get down here, girl, now!" Eleanor's bare feet hit the wooden floor with a soft thud. Through her bedroom window, she can see the sun barely peeking over the eastern hills in the summer of 1867. The air smells of dust and sage, but something else hangs heavy in the morning breeze. Fear, anger, the kind of trouble that changes everything forever. She pulls on her worn blue dress with shaking fingers. 3 weeks ago, everything seemed perfect. 3 weeks ago, she thought she knew what love felt like when Jake Morrison rode into town with his easy smile and honey-sweet words. 3 weeks ago, she made the mistake that would destroy her life. The wooden stairs creak under her weight as she creeps down, each step bringing her closer to whatever punishment waits below. Her mother, Margaret, stands by the kitchen window, shoulders rigid as fence posts. She doesn't turn around when Eleanor enters. She hasn't looked at her daughter properly in days. "Sit." Jacob Hawthorne's voice could freeze water in July. He stands by the kitchen table, his weathered hands gripping his leather Bible so tight his knuckles show white. Gray stubble covers his jaw like frost on winter ground. Dark circles ring his eyes, making him look older than his 53 years. Eleanor takes the chair across from him, her heart beating so fast she wonders if he can hear it. Outside, their chickens scratch in the dirt, making soft clucking sounds that seem too normal for such a terrible morning. "Mrs. Patterson came by yesterday evening." Jacob's words fall like stones into still water. "Seems she saw you and that drifter heading toward Miller's Creek. Together. Alone." The blood drains from Eleanor's face. Miller's Creek sits hidden behind a grove of cottonwood trees, a secret place where young couples sometimes meet when parents aren't watching. She'd thought no one would see them there. "Nothing happened, Papa." The lie tastes bitter on her tongue. Jacob slams his fist on the table, making the sugar bowl jump. "Don't you dare lie to me. Mrs. Patterson saw you coming back with grass stains on your dress and your hair all messed up. She saw him ride out the next morning like the devil was chasing him 3 weeks ago, and you haven't bled since." Eleanor's face burns with shame. In small territories like theirs, women keep track of such things. When a girl misses her monthly bleeding, word spreads faster than wildfire. Margaret finally turns from the window, her face pale as morning milk. "Is it true, Eleanor? Are you carrying his child?" The question hangs in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Eleanor wants to deny it, wants to run back upstairs and hide under her covers until this nightmare ends. But her body has already betrayed her. The sickness that comes every morning, the way her dresses feel tighter around the waist, the strange tiredness that makes her want to sleep all day. "Yes," she whispers. Jacob's face goes dark red. He stands so fast, his chair falls backward, hitting the floor with a crash that makes Eleanor jump. "You've ruined us." He starts pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "The whole territory will know our family raised a loose woman. How will I face the other ranchers? How will your mother show her face at Sunday service?" Tears stream down Eleanor's cheeks now, hot and salty. "I'm sorry, Papa. I thought he loved me. I thought we were going to be married." "Married?" Jacob's laugh sounds cruel and harsh. "That snake disappeared the moment he got what he wanted. Left you here to face the consequences alone, while he rides free to ruin some other fool girl." The truth of his words hits like a physical blow. Jake had promised her everything. A little house of their own, pretty dresses, a life filled with laughter and love. He'd said she was the most beautiful girl in all of Nevada Territory. He'd said he couldn't live without her. But when she'd gone to his boarding house 3 days later to tell him her suspicions about the baby, The landlord said Jake Morrison had paid his bill and ridden out before dawn. No forwarding address. No goodbye message. Nothing but empty promises and broken dreams. Margaret sits down heavily in her chair, aging 10 years in as many seconds. What will we do, Jacob? If she stays here, everyone will know. The shame will follow our family forever. Jacob stops pacing and stares out the window toward the distant mountains. His jaw works like he's chewing something bitter. When he finally speaks, his voice sounds tired and old. She can't stay here. I won't have a ruined woman under my roof, bringing disgrace on our good name. Eleanor's stomach drops. Papa, please, where will I go? I have no money, no family, except you and Mama. You should have thought of that before you spread your legs for a stranger. Jacob's cruel words make Margaret gasp. Jacob, she's still our daughter. No, he shakes his head firmly. She stopped being our daughter the moment she chose sin over virtue. But I'm not completely heartless. She needs work, and Moses Carter needs help around his place. Eleanor's blood turns cold. Everyone in the territory knows Moses Carter, the freed slave who bought his own freedom before the war ended. He works a small claim about 5 miles east, raising vegetables and doing odd jobs for the other settlers. People respect his honesty and work ethic, but they also keep their distance. A black man living alone in the desert makes some folks nervous. You're sending me to work for Moses? Eleanor's voice comes out small and scared. He needs someone to help with cooking and cleaning. Maybe some hard work will teach you the value of virtue and proper behavior. Jacob's eyes hold no warmth, no trace of the father who once taught her to ride horses and catch fireflies. Maybe when you've learned your lesson, we can talk about you coming home. Margaret covers her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. The sound breaks Eleanor's heart, worse than her father's anger. When do I go? Eleanor asks. Today. Pack your things. I'll take you over this afternoon. The morning sun climbs higher, filling the kitchen with golden light that should feel warm and cheerful. Instead, it illuminates the ruins of Eleanor's life. In one foolish moment of passion, she's lost everything that mattered. Her family, her reputation, her future. But as she trudges upstairs to pack her few belongings, one thought keeps echoing in her mind. What kind of man is Moses Carter? Will he treat her like the fallen woman everyone believes her to be? Or might she find something unexpected in her exile? The question follows her like a shadow as she folds her clothes into a worn carpet bag, preparing for a journey into the unknown. Blood drips from Eleanor's finger where the rose thorn caught her, but she barely notices the sting. She's too busy staring at the most beautiful garden she's ever seen, blooming like a miracle in the middle of the harsh Nevada desert. Rows of tomatoes heavy with red fruit, bean plants climbing tall wooden stakes, squash vines spreading their broad leaves like green umbrellas over the dusty ground. Careful with those roses, Miss Eleanor. They're prettier than most folks, but they'll bite you just the same. The voice comes from behind her, warm and gentle like summer rain. Eleanor spins around to find Moses Carter watching her with kind brown eyes, a watering can in his large hands. He's younger than she expected, maybe 35, with broad shoulders and calloused palms that speak of honest work. His dark skin gleams with sweat, and his clothes are simple but clean. I didn't mean to stare, Eleanor says, sucking the blood from her pricked finger. I just never saw a garden like this in the desert before. Moses sets down his watering can and wipes his hands on a clean cloth. Takes some doing, getting things to grow out here, but with enough water and care, even the hardest ground can bloom. Something in the way he says it makes Eleanor wonder if he's talking about more than just plants. She glances back toward the road where her father's wagon disappeared in a cloud of dust 20 minutes ago. Jacob had barely said goodbye before turning his horse around and heading home, leaving her standing in front of Moses's small log cabin with her carpet bag and a heart full of dread. Your papa said you'd be helping me with household work. Moses's voice interrupts her thoughts. But first, let me show you around so you know what's what. The cabin sits neat and tidy under a grove of cottonwood trees, their leaves rustling softly in the afternoon breeze. A small porch wraps around the front, with 2 wooden chairs that look hand-carved. Behind the house, Eleanor can see a barn, a chicken coop, and what appears to be a workshop with wood shavings scattered around the doorway. "I built most of this myself after I bought my freedom," Moses explains as they walk. "Took 3 years to save enough money, but I wanted a place that was truly mine." Eleanor nods, not trusting her voice. Everyone knows Moses Carter's story, at least the basic parts. Born into slavery in Georgia, he worked extra jobs to buy his own freedom before the war ended. Then he headed west like so many others, looking for a fresh start where a man could be judged by his work instead of his skin color. "Come on inside. I'll show you where you'll be staying." The cabin's interior takes Eleanor's breath away. Sunlight streams through clean windows, illuminating wooden walls lined with books. Real books, dozens of them, sitting on shelves that look crafted with loving care. A stone fireplace dominates one wall, with comfortable chairs arranged nearby. The kitchen area sparkles with cleanliness, copper pots hanging from hooks like golden ornaments. "You read all these books?" Eleanor asks, running her finger along the spine of something called Leaves of Grass. "Reading was the first freedom I bought for myself," Moses says with a smile that transforms his whole face. "Master's daughter taught me letters when I was 12. Said knowledge was something nobody could steal, no matter what else they owned." Eleanor picks up a leather journal lying open on the wooden table. The pages are filled with careful handwriting in dark ink, words flowing across the paper like water over stones. "What's this?" "My thoughts, mostly. Things I see in the desert. Stories from my past. Dreams for the future." Moses gently takes the journal from her hands. "Writing helps me make sense of things when the world gets confusing." The simple admission touches something deep in Eleanor's chest. She's never met anyone who wrote down their private thoughts, who treasured books like other people treasured gold or land. Her own schooling ended at 14 when her mother decided she knew enough reading and arithmetic to be a good wife someday. "Your room's back here." Moses leads her through a doorway to a small but comfortable space with a real bed covered in colorful quilts, a washstand with a blue pitcher and bowl, and another window that looks out toward the mountains. "I know it's not fancy, but it's clean and private." Eleanor sets her carpet bag on the bed and turns to face him. The kindness in his eyes makes her throat tight with unshed tears. After days of harsh words and disappointed looks from her parents, his gentle treatment feels like balm on a raw wound. "Why are you being so nice to me?" The question slips out before she can stop it. "You know why Papa sent me here. You know what people are saying about me." Moses is quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face. When he finally speaks, his voice carries the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "I know what it feels like to have people judge you for things you can't control. I know what it's like to be seen as less than human because of circumstances you never chose." He pauses, choosing his words carefully. "But I also know that what people think about you matters a lot less than what you think about yourself." The simple truth of it hits Eleanor like lightning illuminating a dark sky. For weeks, she's let other people's opinions define her worth. Her father's rage, her mother's disappointment, the whispered gossip of neighbor women who used to smile and wave when she passed. "I don't know what I think about myself anymore," she admits quietly. "Then maybe that's where we start." Moses moves toward the door, then pauses. "Supper's at 6. Nothing fancy, just stew and cornbread. But there's plenty if you're hungry." After he leaves, Eleanor sits on the bed and looks around her new home. Through the window, she can see Moses returning to his garden, moving among the plants with practiced ease. He stops to examine a struggling bean plant, his touch gentle as he adjusts its ties to the wooden stake. The sight stirs something unexpected in her chest. Not romantic attraction, exactly, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe. Here is a man who nurtures growing things, who builds beauty in harsh places, who treats books like treasures and strangers like honored guests. Eleanor unpacks her few belongings, hanging her dresses on wooden pegs and arranging her brush and hand mirror on the washstand. As she works, questions tumble through her mind like leaves in autumn wind. What will it be like, living here with this quiet, thoughtful man? Will he grow tired of her presence and send her away like everyone else? Can a person really start over when their reputation is ruined beyond repair? Through the thin walls, she can hear Moses moving around the main room, the soft sounds of someone preparing an evening meal. The domestic sounds should feel strange, but instead they feel oddly comforting. Safe, even. When the dinner bell rings across the desert, Eleanor takes a deep breath and opens her bedroom door. Moses stands at the stove, ladling thick stew into 2 blue bowls. The smell makes her stomach growl with hunger she hadn't noticed before. "Smells wonderful," she says, taking the bowl he offers. "My mama's recipe. She said good food could heal almost any hurt, given enough time." They sit at the small wooden table, the last rays of sunlight slanting through the windows. Eleanor takes a tentative bite of the stew, and her eyes widen. Rich beef, tender vegetables, herbs she can't identify but that taste like comfort itself. "This is delicious. You're a better cook than I am." Moses laughs, a warm sound that fills the cabin with unexpected joy. "Had lots of practice cooking for myself. Man gets tired of beans and hardtack pretty quick." As they eat, Moses tells her about his plans for expanding the garden next spring, maybe adding fruit trees if he can find the right varieties for the desert climate. His enthusiasm is infectious, making Eleanor forget for a moment about her troubles and lost reputation. But when darkness falls and Moses lights the oil lamps, reality comes creeping back. Tomorrow she'll start her new life as a hired woman working for wages instead of living as someone's cherished daughter. People will whisper when they see her in town. Decent women will cross the street to avoid speaking to her. Yet, as she helps Moses clear the dishes, she feels something she hasn't experienced in weeks. Not happiness, exactly, but the absence of despair. The faint possibility that maybe, just maybe, she might find a way to build something meaningful from the ruins of her old life. "Thank you," she says as Moses banks the fire for the night. "For what?" "For treating me like a person instead of a scandal." Moses nods thoughtfully. "We all got scandals in our past, Miss Eleanor. The question isn't whether we've made mistakes. The question is what we do with the chances we get to start fresh." As Eleanor lies in her comfortable bed listening to the desert wind whisper through the cottonwood leaves, she wonders if Moses Carter might be right. Maybe redemption isn't something you earn through suffering. Maybe it's something you build, day by day, with patient hands and an open heart. Outside her window, a coyote calls to its mate, the sound wild and lonely and strangely hopeful. Eleanor closes her eyes and, for the first time in weeks, sleeps without nightmares. Eleanor's hands shake as she drops the precious china plate, watching it shatter into 100 pieces across Moses's kitchen floor. The crash echoes through the morning silence like a gunshot, and suddenly she's crying harder than she has since arriving at the cabin 2 weeks ago. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She falls to her knees, trying to gather the broken pieces with trembling fingers. "I know you don't have money for fancy things, and I've ruined it, and—" "Hey now." Moses kneels beside her, his voice calm as still water. "It's just a plate. Nobody died." But Eleanor can't stop the tears that have been building up inside her like water behind a dam. The morning sickness has been getting worse instead of better. Her body feels strange and foreign. And every night she lies awake wondering what kind of mother she'll be to a child who started life as such a terrible mistake. Moses gently takes her cut finger and wraps it in a clean cloth. This might sting a bit. He dabs at the small wound with something that smells like medicine. "Where did you learn to tend wounds?" Eleanor asks, grateful for something to talk about besides her clumsiness. "Had to patch up plenty of cuts and bruises when I was younger. Master didn't waste money calling doctors for slaves." Moses's voice stays even, but Eleanor catches the flash of old pain in his dark eyes. "Learned to read medical books whenever I could get my hands on them." Eleanor watches his careful hands as he bandages her finger. There's something peaceful about the way Moses does everything, like he's thought through each movement before making it. So different from her father's quick temper or Jake Morrison's restless energy. "Tell me about your family," she says suddenly. "Were you born in Georgia?" Moses finishes with the bandage and starts sweeping up the broken plate. "Born on the Whitfield plantation outside Savannah. My mama worked in the big house. My daddy in the fields." Had two sisters, both older. Do you ever see them now? The broom stops moving. Moses stares at the pile of white china pieces like they hold secrets. My daddy died when I was 16, got kicked by a horse, and never woke up again. My sisters. He shakes his head. Master sold them when I was 12 and 10, said the family needed money more than extra house girls. Eleanor's heart clenches. She's been feeling sorry for herself, but at least her family is still alive, even if they've turned their backs on her. Moses lost everyone he loved before he even became a man. I'm sorry, she whispers. Long time ago now. Moses dumps the broken plate into the trash bucket. But it taught me something important. The people who matter in your life aren't always the ones you're born to. Sometimes they're the ones who choose to stay when they could just as easy leave. The words hit Eleanor like a warm breeze on a cold day. Is Moses saying he's choosing to let her stay? That maybe she matters to him somehow? Before she can ask, a knock at the door interrupts her thoughts. Moses frowns and wipes his hands on a dish towel. They rarely get visitors way out here. Moses Carter? The voice outside belongs to a young man, nervous and breathing hard like he's been riding fast. Got a message for you from town. Moses opens the door to find Tommy Walsh, the 17-year-old son of the general store owner. The boy's horse stands nearby, sides heaving and covered in sweat. What's the emergency, son? Tommy glances past Moses to where Eleanor stands in the kitchen, then looks down at his dusty boots. Maybe we should talk private-like. Miss Eleanor lives here now. Whatever you got to say, you can say in front of her. The boy shifts from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. Well, sir, my pa sent me to warn you. There's been talk in town about you and the girl. Some folks are saying it ain't proper. A unmarried woman living out here with what? Moses's voice stays level, but Eleanor can see the tension in his shoulders. With a colored man, sir. Mrs. Patterson's been telling everyone who listened that something unnatural is going on. Says decent white women don't live alone with Negro men unless there's sin involved. Eleanor's face burns with shame and anger. Mrs. Patterson, the same busybody who tattled to her father about seeing her with Jake Morrison. The woman seemed to make a hobby of ruining other people's lives. And what does your father think about all this talk? Moses asks. Tommy looks miserable. Pa says you're an honest man who minds his own business, but he also says other folks might not see it that way. Says there could be trouble if people get worked up enough. Eleanor steps forward, her chin raised despite the fear crawling up her spine. What kind of trouble? The bad kind, miss. Some of the men have been drinking at Murphy's saloon, talking about how things were better in the old days when everyone knew their place. They're saying maybe someone needs to remind certain folks about proper behavior. Moses closes his eyes for a moment, like he's trying to push down old memories that want to surface. When he opens them again, his face looks older. I appreciate the warning, Tommy. Tell your father I'm grateful for his friendship. After the boy rides away, Eleanor and Moses stand in the doorway, watching dust settle on the empty road. The desert stretches around them, beautiful and harsh under the morning sun. But now it feels less like peace and more like isolation. This is my fault, Eleanor says quietly. I've brought trouble to your door. No? Moses's voice is firm. You've brought yourself to my door, which is an entirely different thing. The trouble comes from people who can't mind their own business. But Eleanor can see the worry in his eyes, even if he won't admit it out loud. She knows enough about life in the territories to understand what trouble means when people start talking about putting folks in their place. Sometimes it means nasty looks and cruel words. Sometimes it means much worse. Maybe I should leave, she says, though the thought makes her stomach clench with more than morning sickness. Find somewhere else to go. Where? Moses turns to face her fully. You got money for a train ticket? Family in another territory? Job waiting somewhere else? Eleanor shakes her head. She has nothing and nowhere except right here. Then we deal with whatever comes, Moses says simply. Together. The word hangs between them like a bridge over dangerous water. Together. Eleanor has never had a together that felt solid and real. Her parents' love came with conditions. Jake's promises turned to smoke the moment things got difficult. But Moses offers partnership like it's the most natural thing in the world. Why? she asks. "Why would you risk trouble for me?" Moses looks out at his garden, where tomatoes hang heavy on the vine and bean plants climb toward the sky. Because every growing thing needs a chance to put down roots. Because decent folks have to stand together when indecent folks try to tear them apart. He pauses. And because you make the best cornbread I've ever tasted, and I'd hate to lose that. Despite everything, Eleanor finds herself laughing. It's not a big laugh, but it's real. And it reminds her that joy is still possible, even when fear lives next door. "Well," she says, "I guess I better start making extra. We might need to feed ourselves for a while if people stop being neighborly." Moses nods approvingly. "That's the spirit. Now come on, let's get this kitchen cleaned up." Work keeps the mind from wandering into dark corners. As they wash dishes and sweep floors, Eleanor finds herself stealing glances at Moses. He moves through the domestic tasks with the same patience he shows his garden. Never hurried, never careless. She's starting to understand that this is how he approaches everything, with thought and care and steady determination. The morning passes peacefully enough, but Eleanor can't shake the feeling that something has changed. The safe little world they've built together suddenly feels fragile, like a soap bubble that might pop at any moment. When Moses goes outside to check on his chickens, Eleanor sits at the kitchen table and places her hand over her still flat belly. The baby inside her is no bigger than a bean, but it's already changing everything, creating complications, putting Moses in danger just by existing. For the first time since arriving at the cabin, Eleanor wonders if love, even the careful, growing kind she's beginning to feel for Moses, is worth the price it might demand. Through the window, she watches Moses scatter corn for his hens, talking to them in the gentle voice he uses for all living things. The sight fills her with warmth and terror in equal measure. Some gifts, she realizes, are too precious to risk losing, but some are too precious not to fight for. The sound of hoofbeats thundering toward the cabin jerks Moses from sleep like a slap across the face. He rolls off his bedroll by the fireplace, grabbing his shotgun in one smooth motion as his bare feet hit the cold floor. Outside, voices shout harsh words that make his blood turn to ice water. "Carter, get out here! We need to have ourselves a talk!" Eleanor appears in her bedroom doorway, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. Her face is pale as moonlight, her eyes wide, with the kind of fear that comes from knowing your worst nightmares might be riding up to your front door. "How many?" she whispers. Moses peers through the gap in the curtains. 6 riders sit their horses in the yard, all carrying torches that cast dancing shadows across their faces. He recognizes most of them: Bill Murphy, who owns the saloon, Pete Crawford from the feed store, young Danny Walsh, whose older brother Tommy had brought the warning 3 days ago. 6, Moses says quietly, maybe more hanging back in the darkness. The leader sits tall in his saddle, a man Moses has never seen before, but who carries himself like someone used to giving orders. His voice booms across the desert night like thunder rolling between mountains. "My name's Colonel Preston Hart, lately of the Confederate States Army. I hear tell you got yourself a white woman living in sin under your roof, boy." Moses feels Eleanor stiffen beside him. The word boy hangs in the air like poison gas, designed to strip away his dignity and reduce him to something less than human. It's a word he'd hoped to leave behind when he bought his freedom and headed west. "You hear wrong, Colonel," Moses calls back, keeping his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. "Miss Eleanor works for me, nothing more." Cruel laughter echoes from several of the riders. Colonel Hart spits into the dust, the sound carrying clearly in the still night air. "That's a mighty fancy story, but we ain't buying it. Decent white women don't live alone with a Negro unless there's wickedness involved. Time to set things right." Moses checks his shotgun, making sure both barrels are loaded. 6 men against 1 isn't good odds, but he's faced worse odds before and lived to tell about it. The trick is not letting fear make you stupid. "Eleanor," he says without turning around, "there's a root cellar under the kitchen floor. Trapdoors hidden under the rug by the stove. You get down there and you stay down until this is over. I'm not leaving you to face them alone." "Yes, you are." Moses' voice carries the weight of absolute command. "Because if something happens to me, You need to be alive to get word to Sheriff O'Brien in town. And because. He pauses, the truth too dangerous to speak aloud but too important to keep hidden. Because you matter to me more than my own life, and I won't have you hurt. Eleanor stares at him for a heartbeat that feels like forever. Then she nods and disappears toward the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Moses waits until he hears the soft sound of the trapdoor closing. Then he takes a deep breath, says a quick prayer to whatever God watches over fools and freed slaves, and opens the front door. The torchlight turns the familiar yard into something from a nightmare. Shadows dance and writhe across the faces of men Moses has done business with, men who've always been polite enough when they needed vegetables or repair work done. But politeness has a way of disappearing when mob fever takes hold. "Gentlemen," Moses says, stepping onto his porch with the shotgun cradled loose in his arms, mighty late for a social call. Colonel Hart leans forward in his saddle, his gray eyes glittering with the kind of righteous anger that makes otherwise decent people do terrible things. "Cut the smart mouth, boy. We come to talk sense into you before things get out of hand. I'm listening. That girl in there, she's ruined goods, we all know that. But she's still white, which means she deserves better than living in sin with the likes of you." Hart's voice drips with false concern. "Now, I'm prepared to be generous. There's a convent in California that takes in fallen women. They'll teach her proper Christian values and help her find a suitable husband when the time comes." Moses feels his jaw clench. "And what makes you think Miss Eleanor wants to go to California?" "What she wants don't matter," Pete Crawford calls out. "It's what's right that counts. Natural order of things." The natural order. Moses has heard that phrase his whole life, usually right before someone tried to explain why he deserved less food, worse housing, harder work than the white folks around him. Amazing how the natural order always seemed to benefit the people making the rules. Miss Eleanor is free to leave anytime she chooses, Moses says carefully, but she's also free to stay if that's her decision. Last I checked, this was still America, where folks got the right to make their own choices. More laughter from the riders, but this time it sounds uglier, hungrier. Moses recognizes the sound from his plantation days, the laughter of men who'd found an excuse to do violence and were looking forward to it. "Rights?" Colonel Hart's voice turns cold as winter creek water. "You think you got rights, boy? You think buying yourself a piece of paper makes you equal to white men?" The question hangs in the desert air like smoke from a grass fire. Moses knows his answer could mean the difference between riding away alive or dying in his own front yard. But some questions demand honest answers, no matter what the cost. "I think," Moses says slowly, "that God made all men in his image. I think freedom means the right to live with dignity, as long as you ain't hurting nobody else. And I think any man who rides onto another man's property in the middle of the night with threats and torches has got serious thinking to do about who's really acting against nature." The silence that follows feels thick enough to cut with a knife. Moses can see the riders shifting in their saddles, hands moving toward gun belts and rifle stocks. The moment is balanced on a razor's edge, ready to tip toward violence at the slightest provocation. Then, like an angel stepping out of a prayer, Eleanor appears in the doorway behind Moses. "Gentlemen," she says, her voice carrying across the yard clear and strong, "I believe you're here because of me." "Eleanor, get back inside," Moses growls without taking his eyes off the riders. But Eleanor steps up beside him, her chin raised in defiance of the men who've come to judge her life. She wears her simple blue dress and a shawl, looking like any respectable woman except for the fire burning in her green eyes. "Colonel Hart, is it?" She addresses the leader directly. "I hear you've got concerns about my living situation." Hart straightens in his saddle, clearly not expecting to deal with the woman herself. "Miss, you're young and you've made some mistakes, but it's not too late to set things right. Come with us tonight and we'll see you get proper care." "Proper care." Eleanor tastes the words like something bitter. "You mean locked away where I can't embarrass decent folks with my shameful existence?" "You need guidance, miss. Christian guidance from people who understand your situation." Eleanor takes another step forward, and Moses has to fight every instinct not to grab her arm and pull her back to safety. but something in her posture tells him she knows exactly what she's doing. My situation, Eleanor says, is that I'm carrying a child whose father abandoned me the moment things got difficult. My parents threw me out rather than face their neighbors' gossip. I had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Her voice rises, carrying the power of absolute truth. Until Moses Carter opened his door and treated me like a human being instead of a shameful secret. Bill Murphy shifts uncomfortably in his saddle. Miss, you don't understand what people are saying. I understand perfectly. Eleanor's words cut through his protests like a sword through silk. People are saying I must be Moses's whore because they can't imagine any other reason a white woman would choose to live with a black man. But here's what they don't understand. Moses Carter has more honor in his little finger than most white men have in their whole bodies. The accusation hits the writers like a physical blow. Several hands move toward weapons, but Colonel Hart raises his hand for calm. Strong words, miss, but words don't change facts. You're living in sin, whether you admit it or not. Eleanor laughs, and the sound carries no humor at all. Sin? You want to talk about sin? I'll tell you about sin. Sin is a man who promises love and runs away when consequences arrive. Sin is parents who value their reputation more than their child's welfare. Sin is riding onto an honest man's property with threats because his kindness makes your cruelty look bad. Moses stares at Eleanor like he's seeing her for the first time. This isn't the broken girl who arrived at his cabin 2 weeks ago. This is a woman who's found her backbone and decided to use it. You've got 30 seconds to get off my property, Moses says quietly, his shotgun shifting slightly in his hands. Miss Eleanor has made her choice clear. Time for you gentlemen to make yours. The riders look at each other, suddenly uncertain. Whatever they'd expected to find here, it wasn't a woman willing to defend her choices or a man ready to die for what's right. Colonel Hart's face darkens with frustrated rage. This ain't over, boy. Not by a long shot. But he turns his horse and rides into the darkness, the other men following like leaves scattered by an angry wind. Soon their torches disappear over the ridge, leaving Moses and Eleanor alone under a sky full of stars. They stand in silence for a long time, both knowing that something fundamental has changed between them. Eleanor defended Moses to armed men who could have killed them both. Moses was ready to die, rather than let her be taken against her will. Thank you, Moses says finally. Eleanor turns to look at him, her face soft in the starlight. For what? For standing up when you didn't have to. For choosing to stay when leaving would have been safer. Eleanor steps closer, close enough that Moses can smell the lavender soap she uses to wash her hair. I'm done running from who I am, Moses. Done letting other people decide what I'm worth. And in that moment, looking into her eyes, Moses realizes that Eleanor Hawthorne has found something he's been searching for his whole life. Not just freedom from bondage, but freedom from fear. The kind of courage that comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to apologize for it. Well then, he says softly, I guess we better figure out what comes next. Because one thing is certain, Colonel Hart and his riders will be back. And next time, they won't waste time on talk. Eleanor's gone. Moses burst through Sheriff O'Brien's office door like a man possessed, his chest heaving from the 5-mile ride to town. Dust covers his clothes and sweat streams down his face, but his eyes burn with desperate fury. They took her in the night. Sheriff Patrick O'Brien looks up from his morning coffee, immediately alert. The lawman has known Moses for 3 years, and he's never seen the quiet farmer show this kind of raw emotion. Moses's hands shake as he grips his hat, and there's something wild in his expression that speaks of barely controlled panic. Slow down, Moses. Tell me what happened. Moses forces himself to take a deep breath, but his words still tumble out like water through a broken dam. Woke up this morning and she wasn't in the house. Found signs of a struggle by the kitchen door. Boot prints that don't match mine. And this. He pulls a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket with shaking fingers. O'Brien unfolds the note and reads aloud. The woman has been taken to a place where she can receive proper Christian guidance. Do not attempt to follow, or there will be consequences. This is for everyone's good. The sheriff's weathered face grows grim. No signature, but I got a fair idea who might have written this. Colonel Hart. Moses spits the name like poison. Him and his riders came by 3 nights ago, making threats. Said Eleanor needed guidance from folks who understood her situation. O'Brien sets down his coffee cup with deliberate care. He's been sheriff of Silver Creek for 8 years, long enough to know when trouble is brewing like storm clouds on the horizon. And this kind of trouble, night riders taking women against their will, has a way of exploding into violence that leaves good people dead. Moses, I need you to listen careful. Like, this Hart fellow showed up in town about a week ago, claiming to represent some religious group in California. Says they specialize in helping fallen women find redemption. The sheriff's voice carries careful skepticism. But I did some checking with other law enforcement. Turns out the colonel's got a history of this kind of thing. Moses leans forward, his knuckles white where they grip the chair arms. What kind of history? The kind where young women disappear and end up working in brothels in San Francisco and Los Angeles. The kind where religious guidance turns into a life of forced prostitution. O'Brien's words hit Moses like physical blows. I've been waiting for evidence to move against him. But if they've got Eleanor... The chair crashes to the floor as Moses springs to his feet, rage and terror warring in his dark eyes. Where are they keeping her? Hold on, son. Going off half-cocked won't help Eleanor and might get you killed. O'Brien stands as well, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun belt. We need a plan. But Moses is already heading for the door. I got a plan. Find them, get her back, make them pay. Moses! O'Brien's command voice stops the younger man in his tracks. You ride out there alone. You'll be dead before sundown. Then what happens to Eleanor? You want to help her, you'll do this smart. The truth of it penetrates Moses's rage like cold water on fire. He turns back, his shoulders sagging with the weight of helplessness. Then tell me what smart looks like, Sheriff, because every minute we stand here talking is another minute she's in danger. O'Brien moves to a map pinned on the wall, studying the territory with practiced eyes. Hart's been asking questions about abandoned mining claims up in the foothills. Places where a man could keep someone hidden without neighbors hearing screams. He points to a cluster of marks on the map. My guess is they're holed up at the old Mercurial mine. Closed down 2 years ago when the silver played out. How many men you figure he's got? At least the 6 who rode with him the other night. Maybe more. O'Brien turns to face Moses directly. Son, I know what you're thinking, but this ain't a job for 2 men against a dozen. I need to ride to Fort Carson, get some army boys to help us. That'll take 3 days? Moses's voice cracks with anguish. Eleanor don't have 3 days. The sheriff studies Moses's face, seeing the kind of love that makes a man willing to die for another person's freedom. It's the same look he remembers from his own younger days, when Sarah was still alive and the world seemed full of possibilities instead of just dangers. There might be another way, O'Brien says slowly, but it's risky as hell and you might not like it. I'm listening. O'Brien walks to his desk and pulls out a worn wanted poster. The face staring back from the paper looks familiar. Sharp features, calculating eyes, the kind of smile that promises trouble. Jake Morrison, you're Eleanor's former acquaintance. Moses feels his blood turn to ice. What about him? He rode back into town yesterday morning, looking like he'd been living rough for weeks. Kept asking about Eleanor, wanting to know if she'd had the baby yet. O'Brien's expression shows what he thinks of men who abandon pregnant women. Thing is, Morrison claims he's got information about Hart's operation. Says he was riding with them for a while before his conscience got the better of him. The name hits Moses like a slap across the face. Jake Morrison, the smooth-talking drifter who seduced Eleanor and disappeared when things got complicated. The man whose careless passion had set this whole chain of events in motion. Now he wants to help. You believe him? Moses asks. I believe he's scared. Hart's boys roughed him up pretty good when he tried to leave their gang. Could be he wants revenge more than redemption. O'Brien folds the wanted poster carefully. Could also be a trap, designed to get you killed and eliminate the only witness to Eleanor's kidnapping. Moses stares out the window at the bustling main street of Silver Creek. Ordinary people going about their ordinary business, unaware that a few miles away, The woman he loves might be suffering unspeakable things at the hands of men who think they have the right to decide her fate. Where is he now? Moses asks quietly. Locked up in my jail. Been there since yesterday afternoon when he came stumbling in, begging for protection. O'Brien's keys jingle as he pulls them from his belt. You want to talk to him? The walk to the jail cells takes only 30 seconds, but it feels like the longest journey of Moses' life. Through the barred window, he can see Jake Morrison hunched on a narrow bunk, his once handsome face marked with fresh bruises and old fear. The golden hair that had once charmed Eleanor now hangs dirty and unkempt around his shoulders. Jake looks up when the cell door opens, and his blue eyes widen with recognition and guilt. Moses Carter. Figured you might come calling eventually. Where is she? Moses's voice could cut glass. Jake winces and struggles to his feet, favoring what looks like broken ribs. Before I say anything, I need your word that you won't kill me the moment I finish talking. Depends on what you got to say. Fair enough. Jake moves gingerly to the cell bars, keeping his voice low. Hart's got her at the old mercurial mine, just like the sheriff figured. But it ain't just about religious guidance. He's running women to California, selling them to houses that cater to men with specific tastes. Moses's vision goes red around the edges. If they've hurt her? They haven't. Yet. Jake's words come fast, desperate. Hart's got a buyer coming in 2 days. Rich merchant from San Francisco who likes his women young and scared. Eleanor's being kept separate from the others until then. Others? O'Brien steps closer to the bars. Jake nods miserably. 3 other girls. Youngest can't be more than 15. Hart picks them up from small towns. Tells their families he's taking them to convents or reform schools. By the time anyone figures out the truth, they're hundreds of miles away and might as well be dead. The information hits Moses like a physical blow. Eleanor isn't Hart's first victim, and she won't be his last unless someone stops him. But knowing the scope of the man's evil doesn't make rescuing her any easier. How many guards? Moses asks. 8 men, maybe 9. They take shifts watching the mine entrance and the trails leading up from the valley. Jake's voice grows more urgent. But there's another way in. Old ventilation shaft about halfway up the mountainside. Hart doesn't know about it because it's not on any of the mining company maps. O'Brien and Moses exchange glances. It could be the break they need, or it could be a trap designed to get Moses killed and eliminate the only person likely to come looking for Eleanor. Why should we trust you? O'Brien asks bluntly. Jake is quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands like they hold secrets he's not sure he wants to share. When he finally speaks, his voice carries the weight of genuine regret. Because I loved her too. Maybe not the way Moses here loves her, but in my own selfish way, I did care about Eleanor. He looks up, meeting Moses's eyes directly. I ran because I was scared. Scared of being tied down. Scared of responsibility. Scared of not being good enough for someone like her. But running away don't make you free. It just makes you a coward. The admission hangs in the jail cell like morning mist, fragile and honest. Moses studies Jake's battered face, looking for signs of deception and finding instead the kind of bone-deep shame that comes from knowing you've failed the test of your own character. You help us get Eleanor back, Moses says finally, and maybe we can talk about forgiveness somewhere down the road. But if this is a trick, if you're leading us into an ambush, I'll make you wish Hart's boys had finished what they started. Jake nods solemnly. Understood. So what's the plan? Moses looks at Sheriff O'Brien, seeing his own desperate hope reflected in the older man's eyes. It's a long shot, trusting Jake Morrison. But sometimes long shots are the only shots you get. First thing, Moses says, we're going to need horses and guns and enough luck to make angels weep. Because somewhere up in those mountains, Eleanor is waiting for rescue, and Moses would rather die trying to save her than live knowing he'd let her down when she needed him most. Time is running out like sand through an hourglass, but for the first time since finding that empty cabin, Moses feels something besides despair. He feels hope. Eleanor's wrists burn where the rope cuts into her skin, but she forces herself to keep working at the knots binding her to the mineshaft post. Around her, 3 other women huddle in the darkness, their quiet sobs echoing off the stone walls like the sound of breaking hearts. The youngest, a girl named Mary who can't be more than 15, rocks back and forth while whispering prayers her captors will never hear. "Save your strength," Eleanor whispers to Mary. "We're going to need it when the time comes." Mary looks up with eyes that have seen too much horror for someone so young. "You really think someone's coming for us?" Eleanor tests the rope again, feeling it give just slightly. Hours of patient work in the darkness have loosened the knots, and her fingers are finally making progress. "I know someone's coming. Moses won't abandon us." The name sounds like hope in the suffocating darkness of the mine. Eleanor has been captive for 2 days, but it feels like 2 years. Hart's men grabbed her while Moses was sleeping, dragging her from the cabin before she could scream for help. They'd ridden hard through the night to reach this abandoned mine in the foothills, where other stolen women wait for fates worse than death. "Who's Moses?" asked Sarah, a blonde girl about Eleanor's age, who was taken from a farm outside Denver 3 weeks ago. "The best man I've ever known," Eleanor says simply. And it's true. In the time she spent as Hart's prisoner, she's realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. What she felt for Jake Morrison wasn't love. It was infatuation mixed with loneliness and a young girl's romantic dreams. But what she feels for Moses runs deeper than attraction or even affection. It's partnership, respect, the kind of love that grows stronger under pressure instead of crumbling at the first sign of trouble. Heavy footsteps echoed down the mine tunnel, accompanied by the flickering light of an oil lamp. Eleanor quickly stops working at her ropes, letting her hands fall limp as if she's given up hope. The other women do the same, having learned that showing defiance only brings punishment. Colonel Preston Hart appears in the lamplight like something from a nightmare. His gray uniform is clean and pressed, despite their rough surroundings, and his silver hair is combed back with military precision. He looks like the kind of man who might lead a Sunday school class, which makes his evil all the more terrifying. "Ladies," Hart says with mock politeness, "I trust you're finding your accommodations satisfactory." None of the women answer. They've learned that Hart enjoys baiting them into arguments that give him excuses to demonstrate his power. "Now, I know this isn't what any of you expected when you started down the path of sin and degradation," Hart continues, setting his lamp on a wooden crate. "But sometimes the Lord works in mysterious ways to set his children on the proper course." Eleanor bites her tongue to keep from responding. Hart has spent hours over the past 2 days explaining his twisted theology, how he's actually saving fallen women by selling them to brothels where they can serve their proper purpose instead of corrupting decent society with their shameful existence. "Miss Eleanor," Hart addresses her directly, "I understand you've been living in particularly egregious sin with that Negro in the desert. Such behavior demands special correction." Eleanor meets his gaze steadily, refusing to show fear even though her heart hammers against her ribs. "Moses Carter is worth 10 of you." Hart's backhand catches her across the cheek with a crack that echoes through the mine. Pain explodes through Eleanor's face, but she doesn't cry out. She won't give him the satisfaction. "Such language from a supposed lady," Hart tuts. "But don't worry, my dear. Your buyer specifically requested someone with spirit. He enjoys the process of breaking stubborn fillies." The casual cruelty of the words makes Eleanor's stomach clench with horror, but underneath the fear, anger burns like a coal in her chest. Anger at Hart for thinking he has the right to sell human beings like livestock. Anger at herself for the choices that led to this moment. And most of all, anger at a world that treats women like property to be traded between men. "You won't get away with this," Eleanor says quietly. "People know where I am. They'll come looking." Hart laughs, a sound like glass breaking. "You mean your Negro lover? My dear girl, Moses Carter is a former slave with no legal standing and no friends in high places. Even if he comes looking, which I doubt, what can he do against 8 armed men?" But Eleanor hears something in Hart's voice that gives her hope, uncertainty, fear, maybe. Because if Hart was truly confident that no rescue was coming, why would he bother trying to convince her otherwise? "He'll come," Eleanor says with absolute certainty. "And when he does, you'll discover what real courage looks like." Hart's face darkens with rage, and for a moment Eleanor thinks he might hit her again, but footsteps in the tunnel interrupt him, and one of his men appears in the lamplight. "Colonel," the man says urgently, "we got problems. Jensen spotted riders coming up the valley trail. 3 of them, moving careful-like." Hart straightens, his hand moving instinctively to his gun belt. "How close?" "Maybe an hour out, the way they're moving. Could be lawmen, could be bounty hunters. Hard to tell from this distance." Eleanor's heart leaps with desperate hope. Moses. It has to be Moses. Probably with Sheriff O'Brien and maybe other help from town. But 3 men against 8 still aren't good odds, especially when Hart's gang has the advantage of position and preparation. "Double the guards on the main trail," Hart orders, "and get these women ready to move. If we need to run, I want them loaded and ready to travel in 10 minutes. The guard nods and disappears back down the tunnel. Hart turns back to his prisoners, his eyes glittering with malicious pleasure. "Well, ladies, it seems we might have some excitement after all, but I wouldn't get your hopes up too high. My men are experienced fighters, and your potential rescuers are walking into a carefully prepared trap." Eleanor forces her face to remain calm, but inside her mind races with desperate calculations. If Moses and the sheriff are really coming, she needs to be ready to help them somehow. The ropes around her wrists are almost loose enough to slip free, and if she can get her hands free without Hart noticing, maybe she can create enough distraction to give the rescue party an advantage. Hart picks up his lamp and heads back toward the mine entrance, leaving the women in darkness once again. As soon as his footsteps fade, Eleanor begins working frantically at her bonds. "What are you doing?" Mary whispers. "Getting ready," Eleanor hisses back, feeling the rope finally give way around her left wrist. "When the fighting starts, we need to be ready to run or fight or whatever else we can do to help." "But there are only 3 of them and 8 of Hart's men," Sarah protests. "They don't stand a chance." Eleanor works her right hand free and begins untying the ropes around her ankles. You don't know Moses Carter. He's the kind of man who finds a way to win even when winning seems impossible. As she speaks the words, Eleanor realizes she believes them completely. Moses has spent his entire life overcoming impossible odds, born into slavery, buying his own freedom, building a life in a place where many people see him as less than human. If anyone can rescue 4 women from 8 armed men in a fortified position, it's Moses Carter. "Help me get these ropes off the rest of you," Eleanor whispers urgently. "Whatever happens next, we need to be ready to move fast." Outside the mine, she can hear Hart's men taking positions, preparing for the battle that will decide whether the women live as free human beings or disappear forever into a nightmare of forced prostitution. Everything depends on the next hour. Eleanor finishes untying Mary's bonds and moves to help Sarah. As she works, she finds herself thinking about the life she and Moses could have together if they survive this. Not just survival, but partnership. Building something beautiful together in the harsh desert. Raising children who would grow up knowing that love isn't about possession but about choosing to stand by someone even when the world tries to tear you apart. The sound of gunfire echoes through the mine shaft like thunder in the mountains. The battle has begun. Eleanor takes Mary's trembling hand in hers, feeling the girl's terror and trying to project calm confidence she doesn't entirely feel. "Remember," she whispers to all 3 women, "when I give the signal, we run toward whatever sounds like freedom and away from whatever sounds like slavery. Stay low, stay together, and don't stop for anything." Because somewhere in the darkness outside, Moses Carter is fighting for her life, and Eleanor Hawthorne is finally ready to fight for her own freedom. The mine shaft echoes with the sound of approaching destiny. Moses crashes through the mine entrance like an avenging angel, his shotgun roaring death and thunder in the confined space. 2 of Hart's guards fall before they can draw their weapons, their shocked faces disappearing into darkness as gunpowder smoke fills the air like fog rolling off a lake. "Eleanor!" His voice echoes off stone walls, desperate and fierce. Behind him, Sheriff O'Brien and Jake Morrison spread out to cover the tunnel branches, their own weapons ready for the fight that's been building like storm clouds for days. The surprise attack through the abandoned ventilation shaft had worked perfectly. While Hart's men watched the main trail for approaching riders, Moses had slipped through the mountain's belly like a ghost seeking vengeance. Now the predators had become the prey. "She's deeper in the mine," Jake shouts over the gunfire that erupts from the darkness ahead. Hart keeps the women in the old storage chamber. Bullets spark off rock walls as Hart's remaining men recover from their shock and begin fighting back. Moses dives behind a wooden support beam as lead whistles past his head, close enough to part his hair. His heart pounds against his ribs, but not from fear. From the wild joy of finally being able to fight back instead of hiding in the desert like a hunted animal. "How many left?" O'Brien calls from his position near the minecart tracks. "5, maybe 6. Moses peers around the beam, studying the tunnel layout in the flickering light of fallen oil lamps. "They're dug in good behind those ore carts." From somewhere deeper in the mine comes a sound that turns Moses's blood to ice water. Eleanor's voice, raised in what sounds like pain or terror. Without thinking, he breaks from cover and charges toward the sound, his shotgun forgotten in favor of raw speed. "Moses, wait!" Jake's warning comes too late. A figure steps out of a side tunnel directly into Moses's path, Colonel Hart himself, a pistol gleaming in his hand like a silver snake. The two men face each other in a pool of lamplight, predator and protector, evil and righteousness made flesh. "Well, well," Hart drawls, his gray eyes glittering with malicious pleasure. "The noble savage comes to rescue his white whore. How touching." Moses feels rage flood through him like molten steel, but he forces himself to stay calm. Anger makes men stupid, and stupid men die young. "Let the women go, Hart. Your quarrel's with me." Hart laughs, a sound like breaking glass in the echoing mine. "My quarrel is with the natural order being disrupted by mongrels who don't know their place. You should have stayed in your desert hovel, boy." The word boy hangs in the air between them like a challenge. Moses has heard it his whole life, from overseers, from masters, from white men who thought they could reduce him to something less than human with a single syllable. But he's not a slave anymore. He's a free man fighting for the woman he loves. "The only mongrel I see," Moses says quietly, "is a man who sells women like livestock and calls it God's work." Hart's face darkens with fury. "You dare!" The pistol comes up fast, but Moses is faster. His diving tackle catches Hart around the waist, sending both men crashing into the mine wall in a tangle of limbs and curses. The gun skitters across stone, its metallic ring echoing in the darkness. They roll across the rocky floor, each man fighting for advantage. Hart is older but military trained, his movements sharp and efficient. Moses is younger and desperate, with the strength of a man who's done hard labor since childhood. Fists connect with flesh, grunts of pain mix with the distant sound of gunfire from the main battle. Hart drives a knee toward Moses's ribs, but Moses twists away and wraps his arm around the colonel's throat. For a moment they're locked together, breathing hard, each testing the other's strength and will. "She'll never be yours," Hart gasps, his face reddening as Moses tightens his grip. "Even if you kill me, society will never accept a white woman married to a nigger." The slur hits Moses like a physical blow, but instead of rage, he feels something unexpected: pity. This man has so much hate in his heart that he can't see the love standing right in front of him. "Maybe not," Moses says calmly, "but Eleanor and I don't need society's permission to build something beautiful together." Hart's eyes widen with surprise at the gentle response. In that moment of distraction, Moses shifts his weight and drives his fist into Hart's solar plexus. The colonel doubles over, gasping for air that won't come. "Moses!" Eleanor's voice cuts through the darkness like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He looks up to see her running toward them, her dress torn and her face marked with bruises, but her eyes blazing with fierce determination. Behind her come 3 other women, moving like deer fleeing hunters. They're free somehow, but the mine entrance behind them echoes with approaching footsteps. "Hart's men are coming," Eleanor gasps, reaching Moses' side. "We have to go." Moses looks down at Hart, who lies gasping on the stone floor like a fish pulled from water. Every instinct screams at him to finish what they started, to make sure this evil man can never hurt anyone again. But Eleanor's hand on his arm reminds him who he really is. Not a killer driven by vengeance, but a protector guided by love. "Can you walk?" he asks Hart. The colonel manages a weak nod, still struggling to breathe. "Then you're going to walk out of here and disappear," Moses says firmly. "Take your men and ride away, and never let me see your face again, because next time, I might not be feeling so merciful." Hart struggles to his feet, his face a mixture of pain and disbelief. "You're letting me go?" "I'm giving you the chance to be better than you are," Moses replies. "Whether you take it or not is between you and whatever God you claim to serve." The sound of running feet grows closer. O'Brien's voice echoes from the tunnel mouth. "Moses, we need to move. More riders coming up the valley." Eleanor grabs Moses's hand, her fingers intertwining with his like puzzle pieces, finding their perfect fit. "Thank you," she whispers, "for coming for me, for all of us." Moses looks into her green eyes and sees something that makes his heart race faster than any gunfight. Not just gratitude or relief, but recognition. The same look he saw in his own mirror the morning he signed his freedom papers. The look of someone who's finally discovered who they really are. "Always," he says simply. They run together through the mine tunnels, followed by the 3 rescued women and Jake Morrison, who has somehow survived the battle with nothing worse than a graze on his arm. Behind them, Hart shouts orders to his remaining men, but the words sound hollow now, defeated. The Nevada sunlight hits them like a blessing as they emerge from the underground darkness. Sheriff O'Brien waits with their horses, his weathered face grim but satisfied. "Hart?" he asks. "Alive," Moses says, "and hopefully wiser." O'Brien nods approvingly. Sometimes mercy teaches harder lessons than bullets. As they help the rescued women onto horses, Moses catches sight of something that makes him smile despite everything they've been through. Eleanor moves among the other captives with natural authority, checking their injuries, offering comfort, making sure everyone is ready for the ride back to town. She's not the broken girl who arrived at his cabin weeks ago. She's become the woman she was always meant to be, strong, compassionate, unafraid to stand up for what's right. "Moses," Jake approaches hesitantly, his hat in his hands. "I know I got no right to ask, but..." Eleanor looks happy, really happy. I never made her look like that. Moses studies the younger man's face, seeing genuine remorse, mixed with something that might be wisdom. She deserves someone who sees her worth, instead of just her beauty, Jake. Someone who stands by her when things get difficult, instead of running away. Jake nods slowly. Yeah, she does. He pauses, struggling with words that don't come easy. "Take care of her, Moses. And thank you for letting me help get her back. Thank you for finding your courage when it mattered most." They shake hands like men who've shared something that changed them both. Then Jake swings up on his horse and rides toward whatever redemption waits down the trail. As the rescue party heads back toward Silver Creek, Eleanor rides beside Moses in comfortable silence. The desert stretches around them, harsh and beautiful under the afternoon sun. Behind them, the mine grows smaller until it's just another shadow on the mountainside. "What happens now?" Eleanor asks finally. Moses considers the question, thinking about all the challenges that still wait ahead. Hart may have been defeated, but the attitudes that created him still exist. There will be more whispers, more judgment, more people who think they have the right to decide how other folks should live their lives. But there will also be friends like Sheriff O'Brien, and neighbors who value character over skin color. And most importantly, there will be the two of them, building something real and lasting in a world that desperately needs more love and less hate. "Now," Moses says, "we go home, and we figure out the rest as we go along." Eleanor smiles, and the expression transforms her face like sunrise over the desert. Home. I like the sound of that. Behind them, the rescued women ride in a group, talking quietly among themselves. They have their own journeys ahead, families to find, lives to rebuild, healing that will take time. But they're alive and free, and that's a start. As Silver Creek appears in the distance, Moses realizes that some battles are won not with bullets but with choices. The choice to show mercy instead of seeking revenge, the choice to build instead of destroy, the choice to love instead of hate. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, those choices lead you home to exactly where you belong. Eleanor stands at the altar of Silver Creek's small wooden church, her hands trembling as she holds a bouquet of desert wildflowers that Moses picked at dawn. Sunlight streams through plain glass windows, painting everything in shades of gold and possibility. The pews are only half full, but every person present has chosen to be here despite the whispers and social pressure. Dearly beloved, begins Reverend Samuel Hayes, a young preacher who arrived in town just 2 weeks ago, with progressive ideas about God's love extending to all his children. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Eleanor Hawthorne and Moses Carter in holy matrimony. 6 months have passed since the rescue from Heart's Mine. 6 months of healing and growing and learning what it means to build a life together. Eleanor's pregnancy shows now a gentle curve beneath her simple blue dress that some people call shameful, but she considers a blessing. The child will be born into love, raised by parents who chose each other with eyes wide open to the challenges ahead. In the front pew, Margaret Hawthorne dabs at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Eleanor's mother had arrived yesterday morning, traveling alone from the family ranch with a packed bag and a heart full of regret. The conversation between mother and daughter had lasted 3 hours, filled with tears and apologies and the tentative beginning of forgiveness. Jacob Hawthorne's chair remains empty. Eleanor's father couldn't find it in his heart to attend his daughter's wedding to a black man, but he also couldn't bring himself to formally disown her. Sometimes progress comes in small steps rather than great leaps. Sheriff O'Brien sits with his wife Mary, both of them beaming with the satisfaction of people who've seen justice done and love triumph over prejudice. Behind them, the 3 women Moses helped rescue from Heart's Mine have become Eleanor's closest friends, bound together by shared trauma and mutual support. They call themselves the Desert Roses now, a name that makes Eleanor smile every time she hears it. Moses Carter, Reverend Hayes continues, do you take Eleanor Hawthorne to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live? Moses looks into Eleanor's eyes, seeing the same wonder and determination that first drew him to her. But now those qualities are tempered with wisdom earned through hardship, strength forged in the fire of adversity. She's not the frightened girl who arrived at his cabin months ago. She's a woman who knows her own worth and isn't afraid to fight for it. I do, Moses says, his voice carrying across the small church like a promise carved in stone. Eleanor Hawthorne, the Reverend turns to her. Do you take Moses Carter to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live? Eleanor thinks about all the paths that led her to this moment, the mistakes that felt like endings but turned out to be beginnings, the shame that transformed into strength, the exile that became homecoming. Every broken piece of her old life had to shatter before she could build something new and beautiful from the fragments. I do, she says, her voice clear and strong. As Reverend Hayes pronounces them husband and wife, Eleanor feels something settle into place in her chest, like the final piece of a complex puzzle. This is who she was meant to be. Not the perfect daughter who never made mistakes, not the fallen woman who needed salvation, but simply Eleanor Carter, wife, friend, soon-to-be mother, and human being worthy of love and respect. Moses' kiss tastes like promise and possibility, gentle and reverent, and full of all the tomorrows they'll build together. The small congregation erupts in applause and cheers, the sound echoing off wooden walls like celebration itself made audible. Outside the church, the desert wind carries the scent of sage and the distant promise of rain. Eleanor and Moses pose for a photograph that will sit on their mantle for the next 50 years, documenting the day 2 outcasts chose to face the world together instead of alone. Mrs. Carter, Moses says, testing out the name like a new tool he's learning to use. Mr. Carter, Eleanor replies, her smile bright enough to shame the Nevada sun. Margaret Hawthorne approaches hesitantly, her face showing the nervous hope of someone trying to bridge a gap that's been growing for months. "Eleanor, dear, I know I have no right to ask, but might there be room for a grandmother in your new family?" Eleanor looks at her mother, really looks at her, and sees past the social fears and ingrained prejudices to the woman who once sang lullabies and kissed scraped knees. People can change if they want to badly enough. Love can grow in the harshest soil if tended with patience and care. "There's always room for family, Mama," Eleanor says, embracing her mother as tears flow freely between them. The wedding reception takes place in Sheriff O'Brien's backyard, under cottonwood trees strung with paper lanterns that dance in the evening breeze. It's not fancy by city standards, but it's perfect for what it represents. A community coming together to celebrate love over prejudice, hope over fear. As the sun sets behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Moses pulls Eleanor aside for a private moment away from the celebration. "Any regrets?" he asks, though his eyes already know the answer. Eleanor places her hand over her growing belly, feeling the flutter of new life stirring within. "Only that it took me so long to understand what real love looks like." They stand together in comfortable silence, watching their friends and family laugh and dance in the gathering twilight. The Desert Roses have convinced Sheriff O'Brien to attempt a waltz with his wife, resulting in much laughter and very little actual dancing. Margaret Hawthorne sits with Reverend Hayes, deep in conversation about establishing a women's shelter in Silver Creek for travelers in need of help. "Moses," Eleanor says softly, "do you think our children will face the same prejudices we've dealt with?" Moses considers the question with the thoughtfulness that Eleanor has come to love about him. He never offers easy answers to difficult questions, never promises that love alone can solve all the world's problems. "Probably," he says honestly, "but they'll also have something we didn't have. They'll have parents who taught them that their worth doesn't come from other people's approval. They'll know from birth that love is stronger than hate, that character matters more than skin color, and that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that don't look like everyone else's." Eleanor leans against her husband's shoulder, feeling the solid strength that has anchored her through every storm. Around them, the desert night unfolds like a blessing, full of stars and possibilities, and the promise of new beginnings. "I love you, Moses Carter," she says simply. "I love you too, Eleanor Carter, today, tomorrow, and for all the days after that." As if summoned by their words, a coyote calls from the distant hills, its voice wild and free and unafraid. The sound makes Eleanor smile, remembering another night when that same wild song had helped her fall asleep without nightmares for the first time in weeks. The wedding guests begin to drift away as the night grows deeper, carrying with them stories they'll tell for years about the courage it takes to love across color lines and the beauty that emerges when people choose acceptance over judgment. Eleanor and Moses walk home through the desert darkness, their hands clasped together, their hearts full of plans for the garden they'll plant next spring, and the children they'll raise, and the life they'll build one day at a time. Behind them, Silver Creek settles into peaceful sleep, a small town where something important happened today, where love won a victory over hate, where two people proved that family isn't about blood or race, but about choosing to stand together when the world tries to pull you apart. Ahead of them lies their cabin, waiting with lamp-lit windows and the promise of home, their first night as husband and wife, the beginning of forever. Eleanor Hawthorne Carter smiles as she crosses the threshold into her new life, knowing that sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that start with endings and bloom into beginnings more wonderful than anyone dared dream possible. In the distance, thunder rumbles across the Nevada territory, bringing the first rain of the season to a land that knows how to wait patiently for what it needs most. And in a small cabin surrounded by a garden that grows miracles in impossible ground, love takes root and spreads its branches toward a sky full of stars and infinite possibilities. The worth of a heart, Eleanor has learned, isn't measured by society's standards or family expectations or the mistakes of yesterday. It's measured by the courage to love and be loved in return, by the strength to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult, and by the wisdom to understand that sometimes the most precious gifts come disguised as punishments. As Moses banks the fire and Eleanor brushes out her hair by lamplight, both of them know that tomorrow will bring new challenges, new prejudices to face, new battles to fight for the right to live and love as they choose. But they also know they won't face those challenges alone. They have each other, they have friends who value character over convention, and they have the unshakable faith that grows from surviving the worst life can offer and discovering joy on the other side. Outside their window, the desert wind whispers stories of resilience and redemption, of hearts that refuse to be broken and love that finds a way to flourish even in the harshest ground. And somewhere in the darkness, new seeds take root and begin their patient journey toward the light.